Welcome back to the Dark Archives. I am the Chronicler. The record resumes. Part 2 of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, filed under the same classification as Part 1, with the addition of a final category that the first entry could not yet name, survival. When we left the narrator, he had spent days inside that dreadful house, listening to Usher play, watching Usher paint, witnessing the man's reason lean at an increasingly terrible angle. The Lady Madeline had been seen once, a single silent crossing of a distant corridor, and then was seen no more. The archive records what happened next with no embellishment. Poe provides all the embellishment that is required. I will note only this, before the record continues. What Poe understood, and what this story proves, is that guilt and grief and repressed knowledge will eventually find their way out. Houses will fall. The question is only what they take with them on the way down. The record resumes. Shall ever bear about me a memory of the many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the House of Usher. I well remember that suggestions arising from a ballad Usher had composed, The Haunted Palace, led us into a train of thought wherein there became manifest an opinion of his which I mention, not so much on account of its novelty, as on account of the pertinacity with which he maintained it. This opinion, in its general form, was that of the sentience of all vegetable things, but in his disordered fancy, the idea had assumed a more daring character, and trespassed, under certain conditions, upon the kingdom of inorganization. The belief was connected with the grey stones of the home of his forefathers. The conditions of the sentience had been here, he imagined, fulfilled in the method of collocation of these stones, in the order of their arrangement, as well as in that of the many fungi which overspread them, and of the decayed trees which stood around, above all in the long undisturbed endurance of this arrangement, and in its reduplication in the still waters of the Tarn. Its evidence, the evidence of the sentience, was to be seen, he said, in the gradual yet certain condensation of an atmosphere of their own about the waters and the walls. The result was discoverable, he added, in that silent yet importunate and terrible influence which for centuries had molded the destinies of his family, and which made him what I now saw him. Such opinions need no comment, and I will make none. Our books, the books which for years had formed no small portion of the mental existence of the invalid, were, as might be supposed, in strict keeping with this character of phantasm. Thoughtful, we pored together over such works as the Ververt et Chartreuse of Gresset, the Belphegor of Machiavelli, the Heaven and Hell of Swedenborg, the Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klim by Holberg, and the Chiromancy of Robert Flood. One favorite volume was a small octavo edition of the Directorium Inquisitorium by the Dominican Aymeric de Quiron. His chief delight, however, was found in the perusal of an exceedingly rare and curious book in quarto Gothic, the Manual of a Forgotten Church, the Vigiliae Mortuorum Secundum Chorum Ecclesiae Maguntinae. I could not help thinking of the wild ritual of this work, and of its probable influence upon the hypochondriac, when one evening, having informed me abruptly that the Lady Madeline was no more, he stated his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight, previously to its final interment, in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. Surprised, the worldly reason assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel at liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to his resolution, so he told me, by consideration of the unusual character of the malady of the deceased, of certain obtrusive and eager inquiries on the part of her medical men, and of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arrangements for the temporary entombment. The body having been encoffined, we two alone bore it to its rest. The vault in which we placed it had been so long unopened that our torches, half smothered in its oppressive atmosphere, gave us little opportunity for investigation. It was small, damp, and entirely without means of admission for light, lying, at great depth, immediately beneath that portion of the building in which was my own sleeping apartment. Uneasy, it had been used apparently in remote feudal times, for the worst purposes of a donjon keep, and in later days as a place of deposit for powder, as a portion of its floor, and the whole interior of a long archway through which we reached it, were carefully sheathed with copper, the door of massive iron, had been also similarly protected. Its immense weight caused an unusually sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges. Having deposited our mournful burden upon trestles within this region of horror, we partially turned aside the yet unscrewed lid of the coffin and looked upon the face of the tenant. A striking similitude between the brother and sister now first arrested my attention, and Usher, divining perhaps my thoughts, murmured out some few words from which I learned that the deceased and himself had been twins, and that sympathies of a scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all maladies of a strictly cataleptical character, the mockery of a faint blush upon the bosom and the face, and that suspiciously lingering smile upon the lip which is so terrible in death. We replaced and screwed down the lid, and having secured the door of iron, made our way with toil into the scarcely less gloomy apartments of the upper portion of the house. And now, some days of bitter grief having elapsed, an observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless step. The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue, but the luminousness of his eye had utterly gone out. There were times indeed when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind was laboring with some oppressive secret, to divulge which he struggled for the necessary courage. At times again I was obliged to resolve all into the mere inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours, in an attitude of the profoundest attention, as if listening to some imaginary sound. I felt creeping upon me, by slow yet certain degrees, the wild influence of his own fantastic yet impressive superstitions. It was, especially, upon retiring to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day after the placing of the Lady Madeline within the donjon, that I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch, while the hours waned and waned away. I struggled to reason off the nervousness which had dominion over me. I endeavored to believe that much, if not all of what I felt, was due to the bewildering influence of the gloomy furniture of the room, of the dark and tattered draperies which, tortured into motion by the breath of a rising tempest, swayed fitfully to and fro upon the walls. But my efforts were fruitless. Exhales sharply. An irrepressible tremor gradually pervaded my frame, and at length there sat upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm. Shaking this off with a gasp and a struggle, I uplifted myself upon the pillows, and peering earnestly within the intense darkness of the chamber, hearkened to certain low and indefinite sounds which came, through the pauses of the storm, at long intervals, I knew not whence. Overpowered by an intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet unendurable, I threw on my clothes with haste, and endeavored to arouse myself from the pitiable condition into which I had fallen by pacing rapidly to and fro through the apartment. I had taken but few turns in this manner when a light step on an adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher. In an instant afterward he rapped, with a gentle touch, at my door, and entered, bearing a lamp. His countenance was, as usual, cadaverously wan, but moreover, there was a species of mad hilarity in his eyes, and evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor. His air appalled me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured, and I even welcomed his presence as a relief. "And you have not seen it?" he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments in silence. "You have not then seen it, but stay, you shall." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements and threw it freely open to the storm. The impetuous fury of the entering gust nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and its beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity. The undersurfaces of the huge masses of agitated vapor, as well as all terrestrial objects immediately around us, were glowing in the unnatural light of a faintly luminous and distinctly visible gaseous exhalation which hung about and enshrouded the mansion. You shall not behold this," said I, shuddering, to Usher, as I led him with a gentle violence from the window to a seat. "These appearances which bewilder you are merely electrical phenomena not uncommon, or it may be that they have their ghastly origin in the rank miasma of the tarn. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here is one of your favorite romances. I will read and you shall listen, and so we will pass away this terrible night together." The antique volume which I had taken up was The Mad Tryst of Sir Launcelot Canning. It was the only book immediately at hand, and I indulged a vague hope that the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief even in the extremeness of the folly which I should read. I had arrived at that well-known portion of the story where Ethelred, the hero of the tryst, having sought in vain for peaceable admission into the dwelling of the hermit, proceeds to make good an entrance by force, and Ethelred uplifted his mace outright, and with blows made quickly room in the plankings of the door, and so cracked and ripped and tore all asunder that the noise of the dry and hollow-sounding wood alarumed and reverberated throughout the forest. At the termination of this sentence I started, and for a moment paused, for it appeared to me that from some very remote portion of the mansion there came indistinctly to my ears what might have been, in its exact similarity of character, the echo, but a stifled and dull one certainly, of the very cracking and ripping sound which Sir Launcelot had so particularly described. It was beyond doubt the coincidence alone which had arrested my attention, for amid the rattling of the sashes of the casements and the ordinary commingled noises of the still increasing storm, the sound in itself had nothing, surely, which should have interested or disturbed me. I continued the story, oppressed, as I certainly was, upon the occurrence of a second coincidence, a low and harsh screaming or grating sound that precisely echoed the dragon's unnatural shriek as described by the romancer, by 1,000 conflicting sensations in which wonder and extreme terror were predominant. I still retained sufficient presence of mind to avoid exciting, by any observation, the sensitive nervousness of my companion. From a position fronting my own, he had gradually brought round his chair so as to sit with his face to the door of the chamber. His head had dropped upon his breast, yet I knew that he was not asleep, from the wide and rigid opening of the eye. As I caught a glance of it in profile, he rocked from side to side with a gentle yet constant and uniform sway. I resumed the narrative. No sooner had I read of the champion's brazen shield falling upon the silver floor with a mighty great and terrible ringing sound, than, as if a shield of brass had indeed at the moment fallen heavily, I became aware of a distinct hollow metallic and clangorous, yet apparently muffled reverberation. Completely unnerved, I leaped to my feet, but the measured rocking movement of Usher was undisturbed. I rushed to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity. But as I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quivered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in a low, hurried and gibbering murmur, as if unconscious of my presence. Bending closely over him, I at length drank in the hideous import of his words. "Not hear it? Yes, I hear it, and have heard it. Long, long, long. Many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it, yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many, many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, ha, ha, the breaking of the hermit's door, and the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield, say rather, the rending of her coffin, and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and her struggles within the coppered archway of the vault. Terrified, oh, whither shall I fly? Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying to upbraid me for my haste? Have I not heard her footstep on the stair? Madman, I tell you that she now stands without the door." As if in the superhuman energy of his utterance there had been found the potency of a spell, the huge antique panels to which the speaker pointed threw slowly back, upon the instant, their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of the rushing gust, but then without those doors there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold, then with a low moaning cry fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies bore him to the floor a corpse, and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber, and from that mansion, I fled aghast. Rushed the storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued, for the vast house and its shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of the full, setting, and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure, of which I have before spoken as extending from the roof of the building, in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dank tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the House of Usher. The record is complete, filed and sealed. Poe spent 186 years proving that certain kinds of dread do not diminish with distance. You now have the evidence. What you do with it is your own affair. If you find value in these archives, subscribe. Every entry deserves a witness. Leave a like if Madeline's return still occupies some part of your mind. The next document in the collection is already selected and waiting. I think you will find it difficult to set aside. Until next time, the archives remain open.